everyone. Welcome to the third episode of The Spectrum That Connects Us. I'm Heather.
I'm Fallon.
I was going to say, my son Pierce is 5.5 years old. He's autistic and my best friend.
I'm Fallon. My son is 4 years old, almost 5, and his name is Nicholas. Also pretty much my best friend.
So today we're taking on what I feel like is a big and heavy one. And it's a topic that when we first started talking about the podcast, we knew we wanted to share our stories on, and we want to connect with you guys on your experiences. The title of this is It's My Fault. Is that the title you had?
Is this my fault?
Is this my fault?
Is it my fault?
Well, right. In the moment, there was a lot of assumptions.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think I'm going to just dive in with initial topic or initial thoughts under this topic. So we recently talked about some of the earliest differences that we noticed with our kids. And around that same time, probably a little bit after, for me, the blame game took hold. I think once autism became part of my thoughts and or loosely conversation, I immediately at the time started to blame myself and assume that I caused my son to be autistic. I think before we dive in, there just has to be some disclaimers. Like, we are talking in a super vulnerable way from the heart, and we're also looking back. Like, this topic is one of hindsight, but also kind of carries on and lives on in its own way for both of us. So just know that this comes from the heart. If you are struggling with blame or shame, we are here to connect with you, or even if just listening helps. So for me, when autism started to enter the conversation, like I had just said, I started to immediately assume that it was something I did. Autism, in my mind, was something to do with brain development. And I had assumed for me that I breastfed both of my kids. So I assumed that Pierce's brain, this is really hard for me to talk about, but the nutshell is I assumed that when I was so insistent on breastfeeding exclusively that I didn't provide him with enough calories in those earliest newborn days. Like, Pierce was a little bit slow to gain weight. And this is me talking super openly, and it is painful to even say out loud, but I had assumed that I did not provide him with the nutrition that he needed because we were struggling a little bit with breastfeeding, and therefore I somehow affected the wiring of his brain. I mean, when I say this out loud, I realize, like, it's hard for me to articulate because often these are just thoughts that I had. I don't really talk too much about it. I know we've talked about it, and certainly just getting it out into words has been therapeutic. But that, I'm going to kind of leave it there, and then I'm going to dig in more after maybe you share your top line experience with this notion of, is this something I caused?
So I think I have to start out by just saying, like, I feel a lot of moms, like, we carry mom guilt across the board. So it's just like, this is just that
it's
amplified.
Like second nature.
Yeah. Like, so I think it's like natural instinct to blame yourself for something. And even though I'm in like a better place with that now, I still go back there. Like, I still backtrack and think, like, what I could have done differently. Maybe this, if I did this differently, if I did that differently, would this not have happened? I mean, I can go as far back as, like, this is so weird, and I never verbalized it to you or anybody out loud, but like, I'm going to share it because this is what this is about. So, I delve so deep into blaming myself about things that I'll be like, were my eggs bad? Like, I had an eating disorder when I was 18 years old. Like, did I ruin my eggs? Were my eggs bad? And, like, my son is autistic now because of it. Like, I never said that out loud. I mean, friends of mine and family know that I, like, had struggled with that. Yeah. But, like that's how moms think.
Yeah.
I feel like it could go back that deep, but that wasn't like my first thought.
No.
My first honest thought was my age, probably. I was 35 when I had Nicholas, which is like normal in today's standards, I feel.
Yes.
But like none of our parents were really like having children at 35 years old, or not their first child at 35 years old. And also then my husband's age, he was 41 when Nicholas was born. So like and maybe that's more of a realistic factor, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm not a scientist or an expert, but I think that was probably the first place I went to, like, was this because of our age, like mine and my husband's, that my son is autistic. And then but then so many other things, like I mentioned in the previous episode that my son was colic, and like I would do anything to soothe him, and he really loved screens even as an infant. So I would play them for him so I could like fold laundry or get the dishes done without him crying. And I have guilt, like, that I put him in front of a screen that made him happy. Did that cause him like to be autistic? Because you read things about this too. Again, I'm no expert, you know. I made choices for my child, and did they affect him this way? And that's what any parent deals with. Neurotypical, neurodivergent. Like, you're always thinking, like, these choices I'm making for my child, how are they going to affect them? But to put it in this perspective, where you think that maybe you caused your child like this for them to be autistic is like next level, like, guilt, I would say. But my age was the first thing I thought. Then TV. I mean, I went into, like, I didn't breastfeed and I formula fed, and my son kind of was, again, colic, and his like bowel movements were strange. Like, did that have something to do with it? Like,
the gut.
His gut health, because they correlate a lot of gut health with autism, which I don't know a lot about, and I'm learning more about every day. The TV, the gut. I didn't breastfeed,
and we shared. We were both induced. I remember like one of our earliest conversations. We were
at a table with like 6 other women, and every single one of our children were autistic, and every single one of us were induced, which I don't know any science behind that, but I know for me that delivery was beyond like difficult. Like, it was a forced delivery. Like, my body was not ready to give birth. And like, it did not take to any of the drugs that they administered me to try to make it go into labor. And so, like, it was that bad for my body and for my baby to be like subjected to those drugs while I was in the hospital.
No coincidence. I, having experienced an induction, had the same. I mean, here's the thing. Like, we're gonna dive in and share specifics. Like, we both already have. But this topic is like less about causes of autism and did I do something, and more about this like phenomenon of like moms taking on shame and blame. And like, I want to say up front that this is not a reflection of us, or like, I'll speak for myself. Like, this is not that autism is a bad thing, right? But it's like, when you think about raising a child, I mean, I guess you like pull even the autism lens out of the conversation for a minute. You give it your all, right? Like, you want to do, I mean, there's just countless choices, from like your prenatal vitamins, your OB, like, you're just constantly barraged with choices, and you want to get them all right. You want to give your baby and child like the best start. And you, like, so I think it is inherent, and it's totally societal. Like, moms take on a lot of blame when anything goes different than what is expected. And what is expected is that your child does not have developmental disabilities, right? So like, I just think it's important. Like, it's not that we're saying autism is this terribly wrong thing that has happened. It is inherently part of both of our kids. But not everyone has an autism diagnosis, so it's like easy to think like, I did something, and I caused this. This idea of like, it's my fault, was like self-imposed trauma for me. a lot of it occurred in my head. So like once we started talking about it, and that was also like, that's so foundational to us wanting to share these stories. Like once we started talking about it, and for me, like connecting with Fallon and other moms who have had these similar or parallel thoughts, like it's so therapeutic to know that you're not alone. And it's so heavy.
Yeah, I think also because your thoughts, you're allowed to have them, and then you feel guilty for having them on top of having them. Like, so you have guilt for this, and then you feel guilty for even thinking about it.
Right. And
it's
then like layering that on top of like blame and shame.
Yes.
And it's like a mental health mess. And to me, that's what this conversation's more about. Like, people will talk about vaccines. These are all like really interesting conversations and topics. I mean, gut health is fascinating, and gut health related to autism, but also just in general, right? When you were saying that I wrote down antibiotics, Pierce took antibiotics at 6 months old. And, you know, my daughter came home from nursery school with a terrible infection. And at 6 months old, Pierce got sick, and it ended up sitting in his ears, and he got a terrible double ear infection. And my pediatrician was like, he needs antibiotics. His ears are close to bleeding. And I remember asking him, isn't this so early for a little one? And he didn't lie to me. He was like, we really don't love to give antibiotics this early. And I held on to that. I mean, breastfeeding for me was the easiest way to blame myself. But as I learn more, and like you said, this kind of never really goes away. Like, I feel in a much better place. And I'm not really looking to assign blame. But of course, you always want to understand. And so I had convinced myself also that by giving Pierce antibiotics, which he needed, and I am all for antibiotics when children need, I had convinced myself that I, you know, disrupted his gut microbiome and flipped on, you know, genes that made him more susceptible for autism. I mean, you know, I studied biology, but like clearly I'm not trying to be an expert here in science. It's more like me talking through these very hard thoughts.
Yeah.
So those are big ones for me, the breastfeeding and the antibiotics.
The TV, I think, is a really big one for me because I actually had like somebody close in my life, like before I received a diagnosis for my son of autism, like we were just in the early stages of like having him evaluated for early intervention, and I had someone suggest to me that like, because I let my son watch TV, this is why he was this way. And I know the person was not trying to be hurtful. It's just their nature to be like matter of fact about like the way they feel. But I still, it sits with me, like, and I still get angry, like, thinking about it. Because it's just not the way I am. I think even now with this experience of having my son who is special needs, I've become so much more empathetic, that I just, you know, I understand like moms in a different way. Well, now being one, right? Yeah. And then also having this on top of it. I just, the mom guilt is real, and like I don't lay it on for anybody. Like, I'm just like, things I would have maybe judged before, I just would never now. Like, a friend had to bring special food to my house for a party, and like she like felt the need to like explain to me, and I was like, you do not have to explain one tiny bit to me. Like, you do what you have to do for your child to like you feel comfortable and your child feel comfortable. Like, and it was because of like a food allergy or something, you know. But like, I get it. Like, I told her, like, I get it. Like, and you don't have to feel bad. Like, and that's just showing like the empathy side that comes along with like learning this, because there's so many like accommodations that I like to make for my son to make the situations better that we're in. And so I just like understand people that way. But I took that comment, and I won't ever forget it. And like, because it lays with me, like, I had guilt for having to do that anyway, right? But I was a stay-at-home mom, and my husband works a tremendous amount, so that I'm able to be a stay-at-home mother. And things sometimes have to get done, and like, what do you do with a screaming baby when you don't have another set of hands? Like, and specifically, this is like a little bit like we can lighten it up a little bit here and like laugh a little bit, but like he
Thank
loved
God.
Little Baby Bum, my son, like Little Baby Bum, like it's songs with like colorful cartoons. And then when he wasn't talking, I was like, they don't move their mouths. Like these characters, they don't talk. They don't move their mouths. Like the music just plays and nobody, maybe this is why he's not talking. Like,
Right.
you know, like, but that was like just me, like, I don't know. I'm showing him something where nobody moves their mouths. Like,
Right.
you know, but you know, I could think about what could have caused it till the cows come home.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll never know.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever know. Like in my lifetime, I don't know. Maybe they'll know someday.
Right.
But I don't. I like to say that I'm in a place where I really don't blame myself anymore, but I still go back there.
Yeah.
Because you can't help it.
I was gonna say, I think it's like it's impossible, like at different times, to not go back and think, especially because there's so much research happening now. There's so many.
And then you don't know if you're reading something that's like legitimate or like, I mean, you want, she understands science like so much more than me that she like, so I'll be like, you're more science brain. Like, is this like a legitimate like article? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, it is.
I mean, because you read about people like detoxing their children and like, and maybe I don't know. I've never done it. Like, so maybe that works for that child. Maybe it doesn't work for another child. I don't know.
I mean,
but you read about it so much, and like the more you delve in, the more you're exposed to, especially the way social media works. Like you could like think something, and the next time you turn on your phone, it's like there on your phone. You're like, I didn't even say that out loud. How is it there?
You know, it's funny. Like social media is such a huge conversation platform for autism, and it has so many glimmers and blessings.
Yes.
And it's also a platform where people broadcast their convictions. And in the world of autism, I believe that some people believe that it is something to be cured and that it is something that should be fixed. I think for me, what has lessened the burden of the blame game is that I, through learning about autism, have really come to align with the neurodiversity affirming conversation that's happening, where my son's brain is wired this way and it is uniquely beautiful. It is wonderfully different. Like all of our brains are different. So I think as I've aligned more with the neurodiversity affirming ideals and conversation, that it has helped me to manage and release any idea of blame. I mean, of course it always comes up. I have had conversations with very well-meaning people about vaccines. Both of my children are fully vaccinated on a delayed schedule, actually. You know, my pediatrician was very open-minded to delaying the protocol, but they're both vaccinated. And I mean, some people believe what they believe. I am all about constantly learning.
Yeah.
And I think because of the constant learning, you're always brought back, or you're brought back at times. You know, like someone will share with you an article about Pitocin and autism. I mean, they're and I want to learn, and then inherently as part of wanting to learn, it's like I'm brought back. I went to the hospital with Pierce at 37 weeks. I thought I was leaking fluid, and I literally went in the middle of the night. It was, of course, a Friday night, so I couldn't be seen in the office. I went with a hooded sweatshirt with like yogurt down my big belly. I was like meeting people in the check-in waiting room saying like, I'm not having a baby, go ahead, you know, women in labor. And I never went home. I went home with Pierce like several days later. I got induced also, and I had traumatized myself for being so worried about the pregnancy and the baby that I caused myself to end up getting induced. I mean, like the blame never ends and it never fully goes away. But I have come to believe and embrace that this is a neurotype and that it is beautiful and important and valid and naturally occurring. So I also am super fascinated by like the genetic side of this. So it's like I want to learn and I want to self-protect myself at the same time. And I do feel like I'm in a much better place on this, but it's also still heavy and hard.
And some people have like a little bit more answers. Some people do genetic
Yeah.
testing, and they know that their child has like a marker of some sort. And this is like my very novice understanding of this. But I haven't gone down that road yet with my son.
Yeah.
I may choose to, because for like in speaking with my son's neurologist, just like you never know what's gonna like happen medically down the path, and so like maybe it is good to know. It may not give me any answers though. Like I may do it, and he may not have any of those markers, and so then you're just left like, oh, okay, well, then what? Like, you know, like, But I mean, it's so the mind, what this could do to your mind if you let it, and you can't help but let it. Like when you're a caregiver and you love your child, it's really takes a toll on somebody.
Oh my God.
I mean, even from like going back to the blame game, like another thing that TV and social media, like Tylenol, like, oh well, I had a toothache and I took 2 Tylenols like in the 9 months that I was pregnant. Like, could that have caused my child to be autistic, even though like the doctor and nurse told me it's okay to take the Tylenol? I was in like a tremendous amount of pain. And then I mean, 2 Tylenols, I don't know, like there's but then you think about other people who are, it's a shame, but there's people who are like neglectful, obviously, and don't take care of themselves while they're carrying a child, or don't, you know, like do
make
really
just
choices.
Like
and then children end up perfectly okay too. So actually thinking about it in that perspective like helped me a little bit, because like I did the things that I thought I had to do right, and it is what it is. This is the situation. And then there's people that do harmful things and like their children are okay, so maybe it wasn't my fault. Like, I mean,
that helped me a lot with the breastfeeding, because I and even hearing you say it out loud and saying it out loud, like I remember getting to the point with breastfeeding thinking like, I took Pierce to every single well visit in those early days when you're going like every 3 days. It's like you're bringing your newborn into the pediatrician, and he was constantly being monitored and weighed, and he was a healthy newborn, right? Like even if he wasn't gaining weight as quickly, he was being breastfed, he was drinking milk, and it makes me stop and realize that I fabricated like a narrative because I was grasping for answers, and it was so natural to blame myself as the person who carried this baby, delivered the baby, and was caring for the newborn. So it's like when you say things out loud, I think that's sort of like the magic of connections. Like it's not that I'm not interested in understanding more. I actually am really fascinated by the genetic testing that's available, and I think we will explore it at some point. We haven't done it yet either. Just to know. I mean, our pediatric neurologist had said too, it doesn't necessarily it may result in no additional information, but also like you may understand a little bit more about which genes are affected, and then therefore perhaps it gives insight regarding like prognosis or like future medical implications. But yeah, like to me this is like the essence of our podcast is like talking about heavy things, whether they are resolved in your mind or whether they are mostly resolved and then come back feeling heavy. It's like
I feel like this is something that will never be resolved as a mother.
Yeah, I think so too, for sure. And the other thing that's interesting on this topic is like we both have 2 children, right? And like my daughter is typically developing, if anything, she's early and like just mature and I'm like blanking on how I would really describe her. But like both of my kids, I breastfed them both. They're both vaccinated. I did a lot of the same things.
Like nature nurture sort of thing.
And actually nature nurture is something maybe we talk about even again like focused in a conversation, because I am fascinated by it. And like you have 2 children that are developing very differently as well.
They seem my youngest son is still young. But he definitely is developing differently than Nick. I mean, well, they're different people, obviously, but
and it's not better. It's just different.
It's just different experience, like that he's doing a lot of things that Nicholas didn't do at his age. And he understands a lot of things. that I don't think Nicholas would have understood at that age. But and I'm doing exactly the same thing pretty much.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I still have the guilt about the TV because I have it on because Nicholas loves TV and it regulates my son. And actually now, he is getting a lot of his language from videos that he watches.
Oh my gosh.
And mimics movements from videos like dance movements, and that's really great for his like motor planning.
Yes.
And I still have the guilt though. I still have it.
Of course.
But I let him have it because it really brings him so much joy. And then, of course, like, so it's on, so then my other son has it, and is learning from it too. But I'm like, there I am again, like,
back with
the screen mom.
Listen, I mean, I have no shame in the screen game at this point, especially because Pierce also acquires so much language and also social awareness. Like I've noticed even, these are topics that we could just go so deep on, but I think it also goes back, like you're saying, screen is one that I feel like is thrust upon moms, where it's like you are to feel guilty and shameful if you allow your young kids to have screen. And that's just like a narrative that there's research on screen for children, and then there is conversation on it, and it's like...
When I was a child, my mother did not restrict screen time. Granted, it was a different world. Like, we came home from school, we did our homework, we went outside and played.
Right.
And that was like, and then you watch TV in the evening or Saturday mornings when you woke up.
Right.
And that was like life, I feel like, for everybody. But it was never like my mom had to be like, no, you can't have the TV, or yes, you can have the TV. It wasn't even like a topic. It wasn't a topic in anybody's household that I was even in. And I was in all my friends' homes.
Yeah.
Like, the TV was on. Sometimes it was their mom's, like, soap opera or Oprah or whatever.
The news. Right.
But it was never like, no, you cannot watch the TV. No, you cannot play Nintendo. No, you can't play Sega.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't... But it was a different world. I mean, we know more now, too, I think. But, I don't know. It just... the guilt placed on moms for that is real.
Right. Autism aside, it's like a topic that we could explore and dive in on. And so, I mean, I think with this topic, I hope that we get to hear as like this community grows. I hope that some people, even if it's just like a couple of people, even if it's one, uses this platform to share and hopefully process and release that shame or blame or
guilt,
ownership of guilt or fault, right? Like I also want to try to use this conversation as a platform, or like to start a platform of like neurodiversity and exploring like what that conversation is. And maybe, I think the point too is like everyone has their own experience with this. And I want to hear more about it, like for our own healing. And also hopefully, again, like if someone can get it out of their head and just put it out there, I think that is inherently a positive thing.
Even just being able to listen to us share, for somebody who's not ready to share with anybody, just to feel like, oh wow, those two women feel the way I feel, in the sense that they are blaming themselves for this. It could feel comforting. I know the first time Heather and I shared that way with each other, it was like a real bonding experience. But I could see in her face, and she could probably see in mine, like what a relief it was to like share that inner thought with somebody who could relate to it. And so that's why we're sharing this with whoever wants to listen. You're not the only one thinking these thoughts. You're not the only one thinking like, is this my fault? Is my child autistic because of something I did? You're not the only one thinking that. Pretty much probably everybody who is in this situation is thinking that too. Yeah. Even if they're not saying it out loud, So.
I mean, I think one of our future conversations, and maybe like sooner than later, will be on this idea of like grief. And because I think it hits you at a, like this idea, I think, is it my fault? Or I am at fault. Like, I think that's part of like a process, and it's different for everyone. But I think that there are like these hallmark experiences that probably most autistic parents or autism moms specifically go through. So I think this is like the foundation for more of this topic to come. So We invite you to share your thoughts and
Please
stories
do.
with us.
We just want to end on a glimmer note.
Oh yeah.
So let me think. I'll just share a simple glimmer. Just, and it goes back to our last episode. We talked about being present. Like, so as a mom who has this guilt and this blame, sometimes you try to like overcompensate all the time. Like, you're always talking, you're always doing, you're always, trying to stimulate your child in some way, that like, is quote unquote like deemed like the right way to do it or whatever. But some of my happiest moments, my greatest glimmers, are just like swinging on the swing with my son in silence. And I remember sharing that with Heather. Like, she was telling me like she was at the beach and she was like sweating trying to get Pierce to like play with her, and like and I said to her, like, Heather, it's okay like for us to just sit and like enjoy sometimes our children too, and just be present and just enjoy the silence. Like, why? Because they're not really speaking right now. We're not allowed to enjoy silence with them. There's still like beautiful moments in that. And it really like, I think, helped her, and that was a glimmer for me. Because when I can help anybody, it really is like uplifting for me. But also to think that way, like, I want everybody to have that. I want everybody to know it's okay to like just be present sometimes and not have to be engaging, and just enjoy your child. Just swing with them on the swing. Just play with them in the sand in silence. It's okay. Like,
it makes me, my glimmer is not specific to, it's just building off of yours. Like, you helped me frame up this idea of like happiness above all else. So like that feels so hand in hand. Like, if happiness for Pierce and then happiness for Pierce and I is sitting in the sand, feeling it, being silent, and like that helped pull me back into, that notion helped pull me back into a healthy, present place. Like, removing expectations and timelines and just prioritizing happiness, and that it's like our own unique happiness. And that is the glimmer for me, is like happiness above all else is something I think about every day. So it like is something that you gave me early on in our friendship, and it's just a little gem glimmer that comes out every day.
All right. Well, we hope if you want to reach out to us, send us an email, follow us on Instagram, and we'll be back with more topics soon.
Yes, our email is thespectrumthatconnectsus@gmail.com, and then our Instagram
is the spectrum that connects us.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Talk to you soon.